The 2010 Enbridge oil spill was one of the most devastating environmental disasters that occurred in the United States in living memory. On July 25th, 2010, an Enbridge pipeline ruptured near Marshall, Michigan, resulting in the largest inland oil spill in U.S. history. 843,000 gallons, according to Enbridge, over a million, according to some news agencies. I saw one person reporting 2 million, so I don't know, about a million gallons of heavy crude was spilled into Talmadge Creek, which feeds into the Kalamazoo River. And then the oil spread down Talmadge into the Kalamazoo River, where with a sheen on the surface, went for over 40 miles. But the riverbank itself was affected for 35 or 30 miles. I saw in another place, so 35 miles of riverbank affected. The EPA estimated initially the damages to be in the hundreds of millions, but after the cleanup was all said and done, it was over $1 billion, 1.2 billion, according to one source. The environmental remediation process began with the containment and removal of the oil from the water. So oil floats on water, obviously. So that's kind of handy, actually, although it does get stuck in the sediments because of the turbulence and it gets forced down. And it does get stuck in vegetation. So it's not as simple as skimming, but a lot of skimming, using absorbent bales that float on the surface to intercept uh, rafts of oil, essentially. And then they have diverters that divert the surface oil floating on the surface to sort of a concentrated point where they have a pump, so that they can actually move the oil from the river to a truck. And this was actually pretty successful, and it took them 6 years. But I mean, considering the volume of oil that was released, it's very impressive that the crews were able to remove virtually all of the oil from the river before it got away into Lake Michigan, which is where it was headed. So the next phase of the remediation process was to restore the damaged ecosystems around the Kalamazoo River. And this was done by replanting aquatic vegetation, just massive scale restoration of vegetation with reseeding and planting plugs and um, using erosion control devices like geotextiles and um, fiber rolls, which stop the flow of sediment in back into the river without the vegetation. Because without the vegetation, the soil on the riverbanks just want to go, you know, right into the river. It's a horrible erosion issue. So they first thing they had to do was the oil killed a lot of plants, and so they had to remove a lot of plants to get rid of the oil. So they kind of decimated the surrounding vegetation. So they restored that. They added back native fish species, and they reintroduced wildlife species. And a lot of the wildlife that they reintroduced were actually rescued animals. There was a huge animal rescue operation. It was fascinating to see the footage of this. They actually converted an old building in Marshall, in the town of Marshall. There was a vacant building that they converted into a temporary animal rescue facility, and you can see footage of the like volunteers using toothbrushes and soap and scrubbing the faces of geese, and using Q-tips to clean out the little crevices and turtles. So the rescued animals included ducks, geese, swans, muskrats, turtles, frogs, snakes, and probably other odds and ends. Including, I saw in one area, one source said that they rescued bald eagles, which is fascinating. That the bald eagles were, they're a water dwelling. They typically like to nest high in trees near water, like a river. Or so. The spill also impacted the local economy. Let's move on to the economic impact. A lot of businesses along the Kalamazoo River had to close down. Essentially, it's not just the oil in the water that poses a problem. The oil contains a lot of volatile chemicals, and the volatile chemicals are things like benzene, toluene, other organic solvents, stuff like that. Sometimes they use that to dilute the bitumen. This was heavy crude, like the heaviest of all crudes, difficult to pump, and probably played a factor in why the pipe burst in the first place. Was that this is really heavy stuff that you have to dilute with organic solvents like benzene and toluene and then the like. Benzene is a known carcinogen, and then just beyond the carcinogenicity, the exposure to benzene causes nausea and headaches and just respiratory problems, and is the same with toluene. So these are volatile chemicals that are actually gassing off the oil spill because they had been contained inside the pipe, but once they're in the atmosphere, they are going from a liquid to a gas, and then drifting into the neighboring areas, the communities. A lot of people had to be evacuated. I think roughly 200 families had to be evacuated because of the level of benzene in the air. It is not safe. So long-term economic impact, where a lot of businesses had to close. Drinking water in some areas had to be just downright shut off. There were a lot of private wells in this area, some private wells within just a few hundred feet of the river itself, with the heavy levels of contamination. So the EPA issued a public health advisory due to the high levels of toxins present in the river. In the wake of this disaster, Enbridge was held accountable and paid out over $177 million in damages. And the company was also required to undertake a comprehensive environmental assessment of the area and complete a full cleanup and restoration of the river. So the final phases of remediation are pretty interesting. They're about restoring the local infrastructure and community resources. So this involves like parks and trails and restoration of wetlands and boardwalks, stuff like that. It also involves the creation of educational programs to inform the public about the importance of environmental conservation. The restoration efforts have been met with pretty positive results. So you can see, if you go to Kalamazoo, to Marshall, or where the oil really traveled to quickly, which was what's it called, Battle Creek. So this whole Kalamazoo River area, this whole watershed ecosystem of the Kalamazoo River is now a thriving habitat for wildlife. They put in a lot of, it cost over $1 billion, so they put in a lot of good foundational ecology there, like wildlife and plants. So it's cooking now. So after more than 7 years of cleanup efforts, the EPA officially declared the river clean in June of 2017. This is a heavy reminder of the potential dangers of heavy crude, no pun intended. Heavy crude is just a difficult thing to pump and contain in on a high pressure system, especially one that was built as early as this one. This one, I think, was built in 1962, and they had upgraded. I read somewhere that they had upgraded the pumps for the system to increase the rate of flow, but they had not really considered the age of the pipes or the strength of the design of the pipes, having not been intended for that level of pressure or volume. In any case, the lessons of this oil spill really should not be forgotten. That's why we're coming back to it here now, so many years later, 12 years later. So we need to remember this. This is the biggest inland oil spill, that's non-coastal oil spill, the biggest Midwestern oil spill of all time. Roughly 1 million gallons of oil. And, luckily there was a swift response, even though it did take years, 7 years. The response was swift. The government agencies, honestly, they took care of this. The EPA in particular,